It's not as interesting as some of my newer ones, but to view this page, you must log into this area. HP JetDirect networking is password only, no username required. Thank you for telling me that I only need to guess the password. I don't need to bother guessing the username. The password in this case happened to be password. And you may say, well, what can you do with a printer, Paul? Well, I've always had this fascination with printers. So Bob set out and scanned the internet again, and this time kept printers in mind and found some interesting stuff. These new multifunction devices, even from different from 5 years ago, can do so much more stuff. And they can print, scan, fax, copy, email, wash my car, write TPS reports, bring me beer, pick up my dry cleaning. And a lot of these can be accessed on the internet without authentication. A lot of these internally don't by default require authentication at all. This is almost even worse than a default password. This is by default, there's no authentication at all. Because what do most people think? Oh, it's just a printer. I mean, what harm could you possibly do? Now, I do want to reference the Zscaler research that was researching this at the same time I was. They actually published a Perl script that wrote an excellent, fantastic article about this sort of thing with multifunction devices. I highly recommend everyone go read it. Here's an example of my example. These are the new HP Office Jets. You know, they scan, fax, copy, print, and they've got this really neat whiz-bang feature. If you put a piece of paper on the copier or scanner or printer or whatever you want to call it, you can go to the web server on the device, you can scan the document and save it to an image file on your hard drive. I was like, that is so cool. So I was like, well, what if these were exposed to the internet? What kinds of things do you find? Now, I haven't found anything all that interesting yet other than a waiver form for a yoga studio, which is kind of uninteresting and very boring to read. The Zscaler post found a little bit more interesting stuff. However, what I think that the more interesting thing is with this vulnerability is if you start to write a script like the Zscaler folks have that not only encompasses, you know, all of the HP models, but other models, printers do this as well. And every couple of seconds, you're just grabbing whatever comes across on the printer. And not just over the internet either, but when you're doing your internal pen tests, this is a great way to collect sensitive documents. Because people print sensitive stuff, right? If you don't believe me, we can look at this Lanier printer, and we can see what documents someone has printed. Now, if you manage to figure this out, please be nice to this person, because I've done my best to obfuscate the details here, but you're all very smart people, and I have a feeling you're going to figure it out, so just please be nice. So here we have the job history from a Lanier printer. Now, I happen to find this one on the internet. This can be kind of a fun thing to do on any kind of a pen test where you can get access to a printer. Let's look at the information we can get from the job history. So what do we know about the type of information this person is dealing with? Something to do with Israel, right? Likely by the title of this paper, they are a pro-Israel type person. Now, political, you know, regional things aside, this is information we would use potentially in a social engineering attack. So that, in a social engineering attack, is a very useful piece of information. What software does this person have loaded on their system? This is all printed from the same user. This username is the same. What software? PowerPoint, and what else? Publisher, right? Excel, and some kind of PDF reader. That's really good stuff for client-side attack. So what do we know about their version of Microsoft Word, or at least the document they were opening wasn't the same as the document that they were opening was not the latest version. So we know at some point someone's using an older version and someone might be using a newer version, which is good information to have if I'm going to send client-side exploits. What do you think this UPO23 spreadsheet is? That's a person's name that I've blanked out. I was kind of curious about that myself. And also this Israel trip, that tells me someone's trying to take a trip. So now with a little help from Google and this job history, I was able to paint a very, very, I think, pretty cool picture. So the university website that I gathered this from says that a UPO23 is an electronic hourly time card for a student mentor. So that's good information to have. I could potentially pretend to be that student, what have you. They accept donations. You can see one of the things here is they printed a document called Donations Received in 8/2/2010. So if I can break into this printer and steal what's happening on it, that might be interesting information to have. But I also know they accept donations. So now potential social engineering is someone who might want to donate. I know what applications they run, when they're taking a trip, their area of study, and a little bit about them, just from looking at the printer job history, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, the other question I had was, well, can I have their USB stick? And it turns out you can. And the Zscaler article references this. If you read through the comments, people start citing examples of, hey, you know, I had this embedded device in it, let me do this, and look at how stupid that is. And that's the kind of thing I'm trying to generate with my presentations. So it turns out if you put something in the SD card slot, it automatically gets shared out so that you can access that information over the network. So now, if someone starts putting their USB devices on there, you can access the information on them. And that's a linear example there. So enough about printers. Let's talk about one more embedded system that we found vulnerabilities in, and this one is a Roku device. Now, the Roku device is this, again, little device, plugs into the network, or it has wireless, then plugs into my television. And it lets me do things like Netflix. It lets me do things like Amazon.com and stream media. It's got all kinds of custom applications. What I found was that it was open on port 8080. And after trying to hit it with a web browser and not having very much success, I used the trusty old netcat. And I got back some information and a little caret symbol. I was like, wow, a prompt. Like, geeks get so excited when we see a prompt and nothing else. It's like a challenge. What can I put into this prompt to make it do something? I was so excited. So I think this is like the model number or serial number. Obviously, those are the Ethernet and Wi-Fi MAC address, and then the caret. And I typed everything you could think of into this prompt. I typed question mark. I typed help. I typed / question mark -- help. Like, everything I could think of to figure out what the commands were on this command prompt. Then I finally went to Google and I said, okay, Google, please help me. And it reviewed a forum entry that said, well, all you have to do is press up, down, left, right, select, home, forward, back, or pause. And I'm like, well, what does that do? It controls your Roku player. Now, it didn't ask me for a password before I logged into my Roku. That means that remotely, someone can control my Roku device without authentication. You could very easily write a script to send those commands. And if you knew, I mean, you could send it home, send it to the same place every time, and then perform some action on the Roku player that maybe turns control of your Roku player over to someone else. So I thought that was kind of a neat attack. Again, open port, no authentication. Why is it there? Just a little bit of world domination propaganda for you. This actually came in from a listener who probably wants to remain anonymous. He's a really strong geek. So they hacked into a road sign, and made it say hack naked. This, again, is another embedded systems hack that I think, in my plot to take over the world, could be used for propaganda purposes. So some even more attacks. Of course, the big one, HDMore VxWorks, scanned 3.1 billion IP addresses, and HD is the one that gave me some of the tips of, if your virtual hosting provider that you're using to scan the internet is shutting you down, that's okay. Just make sure you have a shell script that's pulling your data off of it, like every couple of seconds, so you don't lose their data when they shut you down. That happened to me, and HD was like, oh, no, we've been there, it's fine. You just got to back up your data and then move on to another one. So that was some awesome research. The DNS rebinding attack, again, is attacking wireless routers. And to kind of go back to the gentleman's point about the web interface being exposed, not even with this attack does port 80 need to be open, but what happens is the firewall associates the internal IP address and the external IP address together in the IP tables configuration, and the rebinding attack takes advantage of that. There's a document, if you download the code in the docs directory, that explains in complete detail how that attack works. The two researchers that did the Nintendo Wii and DS systems were actually able to distribute malware off of a Nintendo Wii, which I thought was cool. Of course, Barnaby Jack's ATM, even more fodder in our plot to take over the world. One of the thing I want to point out in this Linksys HNAP vulnerability is that I was working with this particular router. I worked a little bit with PSART. It turned out not to be a big deal, except for one thing that I want to put forward and help change in our industry. So I was looking at HNAP, which is a protocol primarily for support reasons. So, you know, Cisco can remote into your PC and then have a standard protocol to talk to your devices and collect information from them for support reasons. I was looking at HNAP on a particular router. I was sending it what I thought was valid requests, and the web server was crashing. I thought, well, that was cool. There could be something here. I'm not quite sure why the router was crashing. My thought is it was upgraded from DDWORT back to the original firmware. There were some NVRAM settings that probably weren't right, and that's why the router was crashing. However, I got talking to Cisco PCert about HNAP and, you know, started talking about how it listens on the port 8080. You can hit it with a web browser. You can collect information. I fed some of this feedback back to Tenable Research. There's a Nessus plugin that can collect this information for you. You can write a script to collect the information from the HNAP. It's pretty well documented. It's pretty easy to send commands. I was using curl to send commands over to the router via HNAP. So this one actually was interesting. It ran on the same port as the admin interface, but was in a directory. You had to append HNAP1, and that lets you interface with the XML requests. So those are the requests that I sent to it, if anyone can reproduce the problem. So in talking with the Cisco PCert, I said, well, that's all fine and good. I said, but I still don't feel comfortable because I crashed the web server by sending what I thought was a valid HNAP request. I wasn't even trying to fuzz it. What happens when we try to fuzz it and we find vulnerabilities? He said, well, there's no way to disable HNAP. I said, well, wait a minute. You're telling me that you ship millions of these devices all over the world, and you're putting into a protocol that could have vulnerabilities, let's be honest here, and you're telling me there's no way to disable it in the default firmware. He said, yeah, we're looking into that. So I think that should never happen. I think you should have the ability in the interface in order to disable it. Now, you can disable it if you rip off Linksys' firmware and you put new firmware on it, but you can't do that with every single device. I mean, if you spent enough time, you probably could, but not every device is, DDWORT supported and has an easy time of upgrading the firmware. So now I can stand up here and I can talk about exploits and vulnerabilities on embedded systems for, until I'm blue in the face or until you're tired of hearing about it, which was probably 15 minutes ago. But my thing is, what do we do about it? There are some horrible things that are happening out here in terms of security with embedded systems. I've set up a website. I've decided to make registration for this website public. I'll deal with the spammers. Right now you have to email me, and you can email me now. Email me today, paul@paul.com.com. I'll set you up an account. It's a wiki, and what I want you to do is post your security fail. So you go to securityfail.com. It's a wiki. There's already some articles there. I'll show you some examples. And talk about security fail. This doesn't have to be a zero-day exploit. It doesn't even have to be what we would term something as a vulnerability that would be included in CVE. A lot of these are vulnerabilities like this system has a default password. Was that really like a vulnerability that CVE would pay attention to? Not really. And I think that's a lot of the problems that we're dealing with. So I want to document this, and I want to start to raise awareness. So securityfail.com used to redirect to grc.com. So it's now a public wiki, like I said, and here are some of the goals. I said, well, I'm not going to put this website up unless I have at least a few goals in mind. So the first goal here is we want to make manufacturers make a device that will force users to change the default password. Is that so hard? I think for support and cost and money reasons they don't, but really, let's encourage them, force the user to choose the default password. When we were working on the Ultimate WRT54G hacking book, we were working closely with the Open WRT developers, and they said, we let the user choose their initial password. And even if they choose a bad password, it's better than a known password that anyone can Google for and log into the systems. And I thought, wow, that's such a simple thing. It makes so much common sense, but we don't find it commonplace in the industry. We want to allow users to disable all the protocols on the device. I mean, that's like if you go buy a car and it comes with a sunroof and you can't close it. That would suck, right? So we want to only enable secure management protocols. Why don't we have things like HTTPS and SSH on our systems? So those are kind of my top 3 goals. We also want ISPs to do some kind of management of the devices on their network, keep up to date with firmware, do proper filtering, turn off web management interfaces, and maybe block inbound port 80 on some user subnets. I've lived with that